We watched that stage burn out. We watched the second stage burn out. We watched the third stage burn out. And into the frame came something else. It flew into the frame like this, and it shot a beam of light at the warhead, which is represented by my thumb here. Now, remember, all this stuff is flying at several thousand miles an hour. So this thing fires a beam of light at the warhead, hits it, and then this thing flies up like this. Meanwhile, we're all going like this, fires another beam of light, goes around like this, we're going like this, fires another beam of light, goes down like this, fires another beam of light, and then flies out the way it came in. And the warhead tumbles out of space. Now, I saw that. I don't give a goddamn what anybody else says about it. I saw that on film. Phil Klass can kiss my ass. He wasn't there. I was.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. I'm Chris Lato, retired F-16 pilot turned UFO investigator. That was Dr. Robert Jacobs. He was also an Air Force officer. Back in 1964, he was actually a lieutenant. His job was to video, using long-range telescopes, experiments, tests with our intercontinental ballistic missiles. Highly classified stuff. He is a man of integrity. He's a man of courage. He had to sacrifice a lot, speaking out of this, through probably government disinformation campaigns. If we can get to the secret, to the truth of this case, I think we can solve the government issue with the phenomenon and figure out what's going on here. This video is a mix-up of two interviews. The most recent interview, the first one I saw, is from Bob Salas's YouTube. Bob Salas, he's also a retired Air Force officer. He was a missileer, and for the last 25 years, he has been going to Washington and giving conferences on UFOs and nukes. So you remember that question Gallagher asked in the hearings.
But are you aware of the report, or that the data exists somewhere?
I have heard stories. I have not seen the official data on that.
So you've just seen informal stories, no official assessment that you've done or exists within DoD that you're aware of regarding the Malmstrom incident?
All I can speak to is, what's within my cognizance, the UAP task force, and we have not looked at that incident.
Well, I would say, it's a pretty high-profile incident. I don't claim to be an expert on this, but that's out there in the ether. You're the guys investigating it. Who else is doing it?
About the Malmstrom case, remember that? That was Bob Salas. I love they're just, do you know about it? Oh, no idea, nothing official, right? And you'll see in this case, that's the key, right? If it's not classified, top secret. If it's not actually classified, then when you go to try and find it, you're never going to find it, right? Because they didn't write it down. It's not documented. So this never happened, right? That means it's not classified. It's not written down. It never happened. An amazing case. Really, I think an amazing case. So stick around, smash that like button. It helps the algorithm, helps get this information out there, shared faster. Subscribe for future notifications of my videos. I release at least a video every Friday, and then join the Patreon at patreon.com/Chris Lato to support the channel. Now let's get on with the video. Chris Lato, welcome to Lato Files. This video is a mix-up of two interviews. The most recent interview, the first one I saw, is from Bob Salas's YouTube. Bob Salas, he's also a retired Air Force officer. He was a missileer, and for the last 25 years, he has been going to Washington and giving conferences on UFOs and nukes. I first saw Robert Jacobs on Bob Salas's channel back in October of 2021. He had an amazing conference in DeSci where he brings several officers from the Air Force, missileers, men of integrity and honor and courage, to go and bring up this topic, UFOs and nukes. And he's been doing it for over 25 years.
First lieutenant, while he was an Atlas missile crew commander at Walker Air Force Base, which is formerly Roswell, in 1964. On 6 different occasions, maintenance crews reported UFOs overhead, and again, directing a beam of light on the missiles. So Lieutenant Jameson is still living, by the way.
Moultrie also says it was no contractual. There's nothing official, okay? And you'll learn from this video that that's how we're not finding out about stuff, is because it's not official, right? If you never write it down, you never document it as top secret or classified, then what happens when you try and find out those classified documents? You're not going to find them. This is from the actual conference back in October. I recommend watching both of these original videos. You can check out the links. They don't have nearly as many views as I think they should. So recommend watching both those videos. They are game changing. I think this one case with Robert Jacobs is really the key to understanding all of this and how the government is involved and what is really going on in this whole issue. He talks about the cover-up. There's definitely a cover-up. These men have nothing to gain. So check out this interview from that conference in October 2021.
I was part of a U.S. Air Force cover-up for 17 years. I was officer in charge of photo-optical instrumentation at Vandenberg Air Force Base from 1963 to 66. And during that time, I was in charge of a 100-man unit that was responsible for providing engineering and sequential photography for every single launch from that Western Test Range, which was at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Our duty was to provide coverage of every launch, because back in those days, 1963, 64, many of the missiles blew up on the pad. And the engineers at Boeing and Douglas and other outfits that were building these missiles needed to know what was happening, what took place frame by frame, second by second, in fact, millisecond by millisecond. We'd have about 30 cameras set up on every single launch. We'd have 3 tracking sites to provide triangulation for the things. And one day I got a call from my Major Mansmann, who was the optical instrumentation officer at 1st Strategic Air Base Air Command. He called me into his office and said, "Bob, have you ever been up to Big Sur?" And I said, "Well, when in my college days, I was a beatnik, and I remembered Lawrence Ferlinghetti speaking his poems at the Nepenthe Cafe in Big Sur." So, "Yeah, I've been up there." He said, "Well, I want you to go up there, and there's a Forest Service station on Anderson Peak. I want you to go up there and just take a look around and see if it's possible for us to get a line of sight from Big Sur back down to Vandenberg." I said, "Okay." And I hopped in my station wagon and drove up to Big Sur. I met the Forest Service officer there, and he took me up to the Forest Service Road, which you can see here. And we found a place where a prearranged time a missile was launched, and I managed to look down the coast about 160 miles. And yes, we could see the thing from the side. The point was that the engineers wanted to see what was going on from the side view of these missiles. From our positions on Vandenberg, all we could do is look up the tailpipe. So we took a tracking mount up there and photographed with our little cameras a couple of launches. And sure enough, the engineers were excited to see the side view. Next thing that happened is, after I had established this site, Major Mansmann called me and said, "I want you to go back up to the site. We're sending something up for you." So I drove back up to Vandenberg, to Big Sur, and suddenly this huge truck came pulling up the Forest Service Road. It was towing a massive telescope, a catadioptric telescope, with a potential focal length of 2,400 inches. I'm sure you photographers in the crowd will know that 25 millimeters for a 60 millimeter camera is, or a 1-inch lens is normal. Imagine a 2,000 inch telescope. That's it that you're seeing on the screen right now. We set this telescope up and did a couple of tests with it, and then something magical happened, something that changed my view of the universe and our position in it. On September 14th, 1964, there was a launch of an Atlas D missile from Vandenberg. And this group that you see here in front, I'm the guy wearing the MG jacket. We were told to wear civilian clothes up there so we didn't get the natives riled up. There was an early morning fog bank. As we looked down the coast toward Vandenberg, suddenly this missile popped out and it flew downrange beautifully against the clear sky. We couldn't see what the telescope was seeing. So I need to explain to you why we missed it on the site. This telescope had an image orthicon tube. which was attached to the telescope. So the signal went from the telescope into the image orthicon tube, and a 35 millimeter Mitchell camera was established shooting a picture of the surface of the image orthicon tube. It was called kinescope recording, for those of you old enough to remember kinescope recording from the old days of TV. So it was covered with a black shield, and we couldn't see what was in there. Anyhow, we watched this missile go until it went out of our sight, but the 2,000-inch telescope, which at that point had about a focal length of 1,000 inches, locked down on it. We were radar tracking it, locked down on what was in. We couldn't see what was in it. But we were all celebrating, jumping up and down, saying, "Yeah, we got it. The engineers are going to be so happy." And the folks from BU who brought the telescope out to us were happy. And everything settled down. I went back to Vandenberg. 2 days later, I was called by Major Mansmann. He said, "Lieutenant Jacobs, I want you to come to my office right away. The major tells you to do something, and you're a lieutenant, you do it." So I hustled over to First Strategic Air headquarters. I walked into Major Mansmann's office, and I'll describe for you what I saw. There was a table set up in his office, and on the table was a 16 millimeter projector. There was a daylight screen on the wall adjacent to it. There were two men in gray flannel suits. There was Major Mansmann and his office over here, and here was the screen. Major Mansmann said, "Lieutenant, sit down." And I did. And he said, "Now watch this." He turned the projector on, and the most amazing thing happened. We could see the bottom three stages of that rocket filling the frame from 160 miles away. It was amazing. The clarity was beautiful, and that thing took off, and we watched it go through all three stages of powered flight: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then we saw, incredibly, at a long distance, the thing was now heading for Kwajalein, and the nose cone opened up, and radar chaff, essentially aluminum foil, spread out in front of it. Here's what the function of the aluminum foil was. We were testing to see if we could launch a nuclear warhead into an orbit slightly above the nuclear chaff, so that the Russians would aim their anti-missile missiles at the chaff, and our little warhead would go spoop like this and fly over and obliterate Moscow. That's the game we were playing. It was horrifying to think about in retrospect. Anyhow, as the thing was flying along, we saw the warhead eject in over the chaff, and it was flying along. We're going about 8,000 miles an hour now. And suddenly, from in the frame, we saw an object come in from the same way we were going, 8,000 miles. This object flew in. I'm trying to do something here on the screen so you can see. The object flew in. It came up to our warhead. It went around the top of the warhead, fired a beam of light down onto the top of the warhead, went around to the front of the warhead. Man, we're all traveling at about 8,000 miles an hour here. Fired another beam of light, went down below the warhead, fired another beam of light, went around the way it had come in, fired another beam of light, and then flew out of the frame the same way it had come in. At that point, the warhead tumbled out of space. Let me tell you what happened next. Just to say it. The lights came on. Major Mansmann looked at me. The two guys in gray suits looked at me. And Major Mansmann said, "Were you guys screwing around up there?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "Then what was that?" I said, "It looks to me like we got a UFO." Major Mansmann said, "You are never to say that again. As far as you're concerned, this didn't happen." He said, "You understand?" I said, "Yes, sir." He escorted me to his door to his office, and he said, "Now, I don't need to remind you of the seriousness of a security breach, do I?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "All right, then you're dismissed." But as I left, as I was prepared to leave, he leaned over to speak into my ear, to say something that the guys in the suits couldn't see. He said, "Lieutenant, if you were ever tortured in the future, somebody has you up against the wall and they're frying your privates with fire," he said, "you can tell them this. Just to get out of it, just tell them, oh, it was laser tracking. We didn't have laser tracking in 1964. For 17 years, I shut up. I never said anything to anybody. And then one night, I was doing a late night talk show in Eureka, California, on station KFMI. And the topic of UFOs came up, and I had been muddling with this thing in my mind, because here's what happens, folks. You see something that's totally inexplicable. How in the heck could this thing, and it was, by the way, a flying saucer. It was shaped like a saucer, like a ping pong ball on top, and it was firing a beam of light at our warheads. How could such a thing happen? How could a guy from Compton, California, who'd gone to USC and played a little football and worked for Walt Disney and so on, suddenly have his world shaken up by discovering that we are not alone, that thing was up there, that I saw it, it was on film. And by the way, I'm still alive, barely. When it happened to me, my world changed, my worldview changed, but I was under orders to shut up, so I shut up. Part of UFO, U.S. Air Force cover-up, in fact.
I mean, it's just an amazing story to me. I mean, this would provide a key data point, right? If you think about it. I mean, look at the description, right? The description is your two saucers, exactly like the sports model that Bob Lazar talked about, with a ping pong ball up on top. I mean, that's the Billy Meyer object. This is the flying saucer we've seen in mythology, in our movies. Okay, if this is true, that means in 1964, these things were flying around in our airspace, right? In our space, at least, and doing who knows what. Why would UFOs hit a dummy, right? Why would they take down a dummy weapon? Okay, are they trying to stop a nuclear strike? Okay, in this case, if they had this advanced technology, the assumption, or my assumption would be, is that they would know that there's no nuclear actual material. There's no fissile material in the warhead, right? So why even risk it? Why even risk it? And what this was a test. This was actually a test by the US government, or whoever owns this technology, to see if they could take down a warhead in flight and how to do it. And I think they knew about the test. They planned their own test. And what happened was they didn't know about this extra theodolite. They didn't know about this giant telescope that you could see very clearly from 160 miles away, right? They just didn't know about it. So they ran their test thinking everything would be fine. They could do another test. Nothing will hurt. It won't even stop the actual chaff engagement, right? That's what they were practicing. They're actually looking to see if the chaff actually worked. So it wouldn't even affect the actual test. So in my mind, that's the most likely scenario. It really is. If this is true, and it sounds like it is, we'll go on and show that it was confirmed by Mansmann. But if this turns out to be true, and it honestly, I believe Bob Jacobs. Mansmann, I believe. I mean, why would these guys lie? Why would these officers lie? So that would mean that the U.S. or some element of the U.S. has working flying saucer that could fly around and shoot laser beams before there were lasers, right? And by the way, right after this, in Vietnam, we sure got laser technology pretty fast, didn't we? Right? So let's say we get this laser technology that we didn't have in 1964, right? That can take down an ICBM. And again, my bet here, if I was a betting man, and sometimes I am, is that they didn't know about the theodolite. They didn't know about that telescope, and it was caught. They sent two guys down. Who are these guys? Unknown. And they get rid of the film. Okay? That's probably the most likely scenario in my mind for this, which is insane, right? I mean, think about what that means. That's the most likely scenario to me, or that's what it feels like, the most likely scenario. But here are a couple other options I think are less likely, which sounds crazy. But option 2, okay, Alpha and Bravo. Option 2A is it was not ours, meaning it was a foreign adversary. Like foreign adversary owns this tech. The reasons I don't think this is necessarily likely is A, why would an adversary show this capability during an event that can't be seen by the US? Meaning, if you have this tech, then keeping it secret and keeping the fact of alien technology actually secret would be paramount, right? And that's why you would keep it so secret from even ourselves, even from our own government or from our own presidents and senators, so that they can't leak it to the enemy, right? Which in this case would be the Russians during the height of the Cold War. So if an adversary has this technology, why, oh why, would you ever highlight that to your enemy? And why would you highlight it in a case like this where it's just a test? Okay, you keep the technology secret so then when it really matters, you can use it. You have that advantage. So basically, they would be giving away their advantage. That's probably the biggest thing for why it's not a foreign adversary. That's why we test things on our own systems, is we don't give away the information, okay? The second part of this, why I don't think it's a good reason, is if true, and there was a foreign adversary out there with this amazing technology, lasers before lasers existed, flying saucers, etc., how did the U.S. win the Cold War if foreign adversary had this tech, right, back in 1964? Okay, so for me, that's why I don't think it could be foreign adversary. It doesn't feel like it. So the other option is 2B. It's not ours, but it's not theirs either. So we're basing the other category, which is kind of where we are right now. And that's kind of where we are now based off last year's assessment, is it's other. The U.S. government's basically said it's not U.S. tech. Reasons I don't think this is true, why it's not alien in this case, is that, again, why would the aliens show this capability if that's what their plan is, right? During an event that can't be seen by the U.S. So remember, this was a new telescope, new satellite that Jacobs put out at that Big Sur site. So it gave much more capability. So why would they show us something, right? If that's the idea, right? They're trying to show us that they're trying to take down these systems, or nukes are bad. Why would they do this during an event that can't be seen by our normal U.S. test? Okay, so then you assume, okay, well, let's say that they have all information, they're omnipotent, or at least they know that this new system's going in, and that this new system, although it's never been tested before, will work, and that's the time they're going to go and take down one of these warheads. So they have all information. Then the question is, why would they do it to target a dummy warhead? And then why wouldn't they do it all the time? Meaning it has no real effect on our systems. And why on a dummy warhead? And why not do it every time then? This means this should be a common event that we see literally every time we go out there. So for that, it just didn't make sense for option 2B, that it's alien. Okay, and then option 3 here, which I'm sure is probably going to be the number one argument from the debunk crowd, right? Which seems like it's the strongest, would be the film was fake. Okay, so the officers are true. I'm assuming that Mansmann and Jacobs would not lie for no real benefit to their own selves, actually negative benefits. They never changed their story. It's been the same from the beginning. So the film was fake. So reasons against this idea, which is probably the best debunking argument, is A, the video turnaround time was 1 or 2 days, according to Jacobs. Okay, that's very fast. And so if you consider that Jacobs and Mansmann they know these missiles, know what they're looking at, they should have been able to validate pretty quickly, I would assume, seeing it launch from the pad, especially, that it was a different day or a different missile or modified. Okay, so I think 1 or 2 days is all the amount of time they would have. To go into B, really, is CGI special effects. Remember, this is back in 1964. Likely not good enough, at least at that time, to convince Mansmann and Jacobs, right? To convince these two guys who are experts. So I think the CGI special effects were probably not good enough at that time, in that turnaround, to actually make that happen. But I guess could be. And then C, if it was a fake, right? If it was a fake, why go through all of this? Why didn't they just come clean, right? If it was an actual viable, believable option, instead of hassling Jacobs, right? Instead of doing these disinformation campaigns, why not just go to Jacobs and say, look, this was a counter-intel operation. Basically, this was planted evidence we did on purpose. And the idea was to try and root out some sort of mole in the organization, right? So what you're doing is you're trying to put disinformation ops to Soviet operations because you think you have some sort of mole or leak. Okay, I'm not an expert in counter-intel ops, but that just seems like the most viable option I can think of why they would do it. If that's the case, why didn't they just tell Jacobs that? You know, probably because it wouldn't be believable to what he saw. So really, those are the three options. The final option, I'm just assuming that Mansmann and Jacobs are telling the truth. Obviously, they could be lying, but based off their testimonies, I don't think that's true. So we'll go back here to Bob Salas at that amazing conference.
Jacobs. I'm going to quickly play an animation that was put together. Again, Robert Hastings had a lot to do with this one too. So let me just play that.
The nose cones separate. The chaff flew out in front of it. We saw this as obviously reflections of light rippling like that. And then we saw the dummy warhead flying along. It's going between 6,000 and 8,000 miles an hour at that point, and it's on the fringe of space. And suddenly, into that frame, an object flew in, chasing the chaff, the warhead, and so on, at the same speed. And in polar orbit, it fired a beam of light at the warhead. The beam of light struck that. The object flipped, shot another beam of light at the dummy warhead, went around this, shot another beam of light at it, went down, shot a beam of light, and then flew out the same way it had come in. At which time, the dummy warhead fell out of the frame.
And then we got the statement of, Major Mansmann. If I can get to this.
The nose cones separate.
So Major Mansmann responded to, I think this was a journalist that wanted more information about this incident, and Major Mansmann did support Dr. Jacobs in these letters, and I'll just read a little bit here. We knew the missile nose cone size, but could not compare since did not know how far from the missile the object was from the missile at the time of the beam release. The shape was classic disc. The center seemed to be raised, bubble. Not sure any ports or slits could be seen, but was stationary or moving slightly, floating over the entire lower saucer shape, which was glowing and seemed to be rotating slowly at the point of beam release. Okay, Dr. Jacobs, any final words?
No. I could tell a couple of tales about the further cover-up. Let me just talk, because it's kind of funny. One of the researchers who contacted me was Lee Graham, who worked for one of the missile manufacturing companies in Los Angeles. Lee was quite interested in UFOs. He pursued the thing throughout his lifetime. So he contacted me, and I told him my story, and then he went to verify what I had told him. He contacted the Air Force to inquire about Lieutenant Robert M. Jacobs. They told him there was no such Lieutenant Robert M. Jacobs, nor had there ever been. He went to Vandenberg. He said he asked them if there had been a Lieutenant Robert M. Jacobs as officer in charge of optical instrumentation in the 1369th Photo Squadron. He was told no such officer ever existed. He pursued his research. He wondered if there had been a missile launch on September 14th, 1964. He was told there was no such missile launch ever taking place. We continued his investigation, and finally the Air Force had to admit that, well, yes, there had been a Lieutenant Robert M. Jacobs, and yes, he was officer in charge of photo-optical instrumentation at Vandenberg, and yes, there was a missile launch on the date in question. When Lee filed a Freedom of Information Act request to get a copy of the film, he was told no such film existed. And let me verify that it probably doesn't, because there's been some controversy over whether I'm telling the truth, whether Major Mansmann is telling the truth, and I assure you that we are. He did. He is passed on, unfortunately. And what we know is that the two guys in gray suits who were in Major Mansmann's office that day were with one of the government agencies that are all alphabetized. We believe it was the CIA. They took the reel of film from Major Mansmann. They reeled it down, and they snipped off the bit of the film that had the encounter on it. They gave Major Mansmann back the rest of the film, and they said to him, "We don't need to remind you of a security breach, do we?" He said, "No, sir." And they walked out of his office with the film in hand. Major Mansmann reported how many people had seen the film. And here's who he reported saw it. He saw it. The commanding officer saw it. The chief scientist saw it. I saw it. And one other person saw it. Those are the only people who saw this film. There was a man named Kingston George who was involved in the thing as an engineer with one of the missile companies. He did not see the same film that Major Mansmann and I saw. That bit of film went off to God knows where, wherever the CIA does stuff, and no one has ever seen it since. I've had a couple of so-called investigators who said, "Oh, I got your film, I found your film," and they showed me the film, and I went, no, that's not the film. That's it, Bob.
I'm afraid we're going to have to
Back
move
to you.
on, sir.
So they even said there is a cover-up, right? Because initially they say he never existed. There's no site at Big Sur. He wasn't an officer. And now the Air Force has said that they are. So the question is the military doing it? Is it some other agency like the MIB, the CIA, that are actually taking advantage of the military? Or is it elements within the military that are doing this? I mean, my hunch is it seems like it's always dudes from somewhere else, okay, somewhere else in the government, right? Who are these people, actually? Do we have any videos of these guys? Do we have any pictures of these people? Do they even work for our government? Have we considered that? That's the other option, is that the government's compromised. In this case, what do I think? It feels like that those people knew. It feels like it was this feels like a U.S. test to me, if I had to guess. Okay, Nimitz, Tic Tac, those other ones didn't feel like tests to me, but this one felt like a test. It feels like a test. And that would mean that U.S. had technology in 1964. We have a working saucer. We know how to use it. We know how to fly it around. And that would mean we probably don't have a lot of them. And now we're trying to figure out how to reverse engineer it. Timing would line up with Bob Lazar. All the things Bob Lazar said would coincide with this. It would actually coincide. I mean, it shows that it's just corroborating. It's all just corroborating. So you just draw a line between 1947, Roswell, get to 1964, Bob Jacobs, 1989, gets to Bob Lazar. We got the Bobs. I wonder if the original alien was named Bob. So after 89, what happened? I've heard rumors they took it back. The aliens took back the technology once it actually got out. That could also be likely. So either way, amazing, amazing story. Okay, I'll leave you with the end here. What are these guys? Why would Bob Jacobs lie about this? Okay. Why would two Air Force officers lie about this statement? By the way, there's many other officers. Okay, who take integrity at its word. That actually consider integrity as the one thing that people can't take away from us. And they can't. I'll leave you this last section from Bob Jacobs. Amazing guy. Please watch the full interviews. Watch that full Bob Salas conference. It's amazing. And thanks for being here. Peace.
Major Florence J. Mansmann was a man of great honor and great scientific standing in the community. For him to corroborate it is good enough for me. Even if I didn't believe myself, I would believe Major Mansmann. Now, there were two of us who were Air Force officers at the time, and we saw something, and we have both corroborated with each other that we saw that's what we recall from the incident. And what I have to ask skeptics, or people who disbelieve what I'm saying, is why would I make this up? Why would Major Florence J. Mansmann, Dr. Major Florence J. Mansmann, why would he make it up? What have we to gain? I've made no money from this. I've got nothing but pain and suffering out of talking about it. I've been harassed at my home. This was used against me partially in losing a job once in teaching. I've had a hell of a time after I've told this story, but I continue to tell the story because I think it's important for people to understand that this sort of shit goes on in the government. That the government covers up information that we are entitled to know about as citizens of this country. That's why I tell my story. That's why I'm telling it to you. And I'll continue to tell it as long as I'm alive, and I'll always tell it the same way because it only happened one way. I never vary the story because I can't. It's the truth.